Hey, this is Andrew Brown from ExamPro, and welcome to the Serverless Fundamentals, the EXP-SF1 exam guide preview. And the whole point of this video is to gather community feedback to see how people feel about the contents of the exam, to see if it's fair and etc. there, and also to give you an introspective of why I made it this way compared to other cloud certifications. So let's jump into it. So the ExamPro Serverless Fundamentals EXP-SF1 exam validates that an individual has fundamental knowledge, skills, and abilities to begin utilizing AWS serverless technologies. And this exam is the entry-level certification for those seeking a career as a serverless engineer or a serverless architect. So let's go down below here. The certification holder will be able to explain the business value of adopting serverless over traditional workloads, have a good understanding of general best practices of serverless architectures and serverless development, have a high-level understanding and practical application of available AWS serverless services, a strong understanding of AWS Lambda architecture, and identify cost-effective strategies for serverless services. Now, I underlined this one in particular just because when you look at AWS certifications, they haven't always been that practical, and they've been more lecture focused, where when you look at Azure certifications, they're highly practical, where it's like, do these things. And so my approach is kind of me in the middle. I like a good theoretical knowledge base, and I also like practical stuff. So I'm meeting in the middle between those two. We're talking about prerequisite knowledge. An individual should have general knowledge of AWS, like creating an account, logging in, monitoring their spend, and using IAM. And a good recommendation would be having the AWS Certified Cloud Practitioner before attempting this exam. So the thing is, you could go and take this without taking the Certified Cloud Practitioner, but I kind of want you to have that knowledge just because I'm not going to include how to set up an account and like billing stuff that is stuff that you would normally have, like just like setting up a budget and alarm, things like that, that's usually covered in the Cloud Practitioner. But it's not that you need a lot of cloud knowledge. So if you do feel that you're struggling at the start of this course, then maybe you should go look at this one here. Moving on to the actual practical serverless knowledge. So this certification here focuses on utilizing AWS serverless services, mostly in isolate via the AWS console. It's not important to fully understand how code works, but to have confidence launching and basic configuration of common serverless services. So here is a really big list. I know it looks very intimidating, and I could have made it even longer, but the idea is that I just want you to be able to touch as many services as possible, and I'm going to try to reinforce that somehow in the exam. We'll talk about that when we go down the list here, but let's just go and read through it. So I want you to be able to deploy a serverless project, so something really simple, like API Gateway and Lambda, and play around with the SAM CLI. We're going to look at using Lambda to use the SDK to use an AI service, making SQS queue, making SNS topic with an HTTP endpoint. This is very popular when you're trying to integrate traditional web apps with serverless architecture, creating RDS instance. Now, you might say, well, RDS isn't really a serverless a service, but I'm finding that a lot of people are adopting RDS instances early on because it's just what they're familiar with, and you can totally do it with RDS proxy. So I think that it definitely should be on the list here. Then you have Aurora serverless instance, which is just the serverless version of Aurora that comes in version 1 and 2. It doesn't really matter the versions, we just need to know how to use it. Then we have creating an application load balancer. So you can back a Lambda, front a Lambda with application load balancer. And so ALB, you don't really think of it as a serverless service, but it does work with that, and it usually works with Global Accelerator. So those three you'll see combined. Then we should be able to create a simple S3 static website with a CloudFront distribution. We should be able to create a DynamoDB table. I'm not going to get into capacity and all these other crazy things with it. We should just be able to practically use a table. And then with DynamoDB, we should be able to set up a stream to Lambda. You should be able to create a state machine via step functions. And when I say that, there's a lot of examples that are already there that AWS provides. It's a lot of work to configure a state machine, so we'll probably lean on the examples that are already there for us and just try to understand the use cases there. Then we're looking at creating an S3 bucket and triggering a Lambda via S3 events. Very, very common workflow with serverless. Like, think of when you have a thumbnail and you upload an image and you want it to turn into a thumbnail with a Lambda. Then we're going to look at Secrets Manager and Parameter Store in a Lambda. So that's just pulling that data down. Secrets Manager is used for database rotation mostly, but that's not the purpose here. It's just a matter of using the SDK. Then something you can do is attach Elastic File System to a Lambda. So we're not going to really do much other than just show you how to attach it. This is more of an advanced topic for the associate, but I want to show you how to push a container to Elastic Container Registry. But in this course, or this level of certification, we're not really going to focus on Lambda containers. So really it's just making that any kind of container, pushing it to ECR. That's all that we need to do there. I want to make sure you know how to provision a Lambda using CloudFormation only. The reason why is so that you can understand why SAM is so valuable and have confidence in it. This is a big problem that a lot of people have, where they're going, well, should I use SAM or should I use CloudFormation because SAM is abstracting stuff? But I want you to know that abstraction is worth it. We should launch a Fargate task, and Fargate is a big pain to configure. So we're not going to go into super details with this. We just got to get a task running, any kind of task, and that is good enough. We want to turn on the IAM Access Analyzer to understand how it works. We want to create an event bridge event. If you notice, I didn't say something particular because I'm just not sure what. Normally, I think event bridge, I think of like backups and stuff like that, but I'll have to think of a better example there. In the wild, most people aren't using code commit, but I think that it should be good practice for us just to be familiar with it because it's very well integrated with code deploy, code build, and code pipeline. So I think the basic action of pushing repo is not a big deal. We should spin up an Elasticsearch service and run a query. We should create a Cognito user pool and launch an AWS hosted login page. Cognito is it's not hard, but it's not well organized, the documentation, and it can be a lot of work to configure. So I think for the associate and the professional, we'll leave more advanced configurations there, and we'll just keep it really, really simple there. X-ray is also a big pain, but we'll keep it really simple. All we want to do is get a Lambda in there and just have a sub segment in there just to show you that you can do sub monitoring. But X-ray is a big time sink, and I don't want to spend too much time on that at this level certification. We should know how to log errors, info, and things like that into CloudWatch logs and be able to view it. We'll probably talk a bit about like good formats for logs. A lot of times I use JSON, and I'll load it with kind of like a label, so it's easy to search within CloudWatch log insights. We want to be able to just push or move a Lambda into a VPC and then just view the Elastic Network Interface. ENI is not really a serverless service per se, but it's just like when you're working with Lambda VPCs, you need to know about that resource. So I want you to be aware of it. We want to just get some hands-on with Route 53. So it doesn't matter what, we just want to point it to some AWS resource. CloudFront is the go-to for that. We want to create an AppSync database and run a simple query. We're not going to get into the guts of GraphQL, but we just want to go through the motions of it. We want to attach a WAF to an application load balancer. We could totally do this with API Gateway or what have you. Doesn't really matter what we're attaching it to, just that we are attaching WAF and we understand what it does. We want to launch an example AWS Amplify application. I don't really want to get into Amplify because it is a whole box of worms, but I think that we should at least know about it. And so launching up an AWS Amplify application, even if it's a sample one, just talking around it is good enough. And creating IAM permissions so that Lambda can access files on S3. So just going through the policy creator or wizard and just knowing how to add stuff there and just understanding the base things that Lambda need to actually execute and do things like that. In terms of programming, because people always ask us, they're like, okay, does it have a lot of programming, a little programming? So I'm very explicit here that we're going to need basic understandings of the AWS SDK. We're going to just use Node.js in all our examples. I don't even like Node. I like Ruby, but I just want to keep it simple, and Node is used by everybody. And you don't really need to know what, like how to use that JavaScript, just that you're plugging it in and it does something, okay? CloudFormation, but really we're going to be more focused on SAM, but SAM is based off of CloudFormation, so we need to know both. We'll do a little bit of SAM CLI, not really the focus of the certification, but we just want to push, as it said in the top example here, we just want to be able to deploy it, and so we use the CLI for that. Writing IAM policies, which is kind of covered over here. And then YAML, JSON, and TOML, very, very simple to understand those three there. I should probably put XML on there just in case. Oh, this is in view mode, so I can't, but I'll probably add XML because I think that's a standard thing there. Let's take a look at the exam content. So response types right now is multiple choice and multiple select. I actually have the ability to have different kinds of exam questions. And so I'm not sure what I'll do here. I might make some other ones here. So where you can like go through a scenario, or you can match things together, or I can have evaluators to execute code, and then you have to make it work. Probably wouldn't do that for this certification, but probably something I'd love to do, but I just don't know if that would be a bad experience during the exam process, is having sandboxes, because I can spin up temporary AWS sandboxes and have you do something and validate it, but sometimes the timing of that is variable, and so if you're on a timed exam, it can get very stressful if, like, for whatever reason, there's an issue on the AWS side of it, right? And so I definitely want to incorporate that stuff, but we'll have to see as time goes on. Just like most exams, there's going to be unanswered questions, and so, or you can have unanswered questions, but you don't want to do this because they're going to be marked as incorrect anyway, so always just take your best guess. Then there's unscored content, so you might see a couple of additional questions. So if the exam has X amount of questions, there might be 2 additional ones, and they could be really, really weird questions of greater difficulty and that you didn't study for, and you might stress you out, but just realize that we have to put those in there because it helps us gather information about, is the exam hard enough, or, would this new question be worth testing out? Do people already have the knowledge on it? And so just be aware that there might be a couple additional questions you weren't expecting. In terms of exam results, you're either going to get a pass or fail when you're done. It's going to be scored out of a point system out of 0 to 1,000. I don't know why AWS has it started at 100. I don't understand that. Yeah, you must be able to score 0, right? Unless they just want to make people feel good and they say, here, you get 10% always. Then you get your reported domain score percentage. So let's say you were doing domain 1 serverless concepts. And so it'd say you scored 82% out of this section. That doesn't mean 82% of your total score, but 82% of that weighted score. And we'll talk about that when we look at the table down below. And now let's take a look at the domain. So this is the lecture content. So I know there's all this stuff here, and this stuff is basically worked within this content here, right? So even though I don't have a particular category for all that practical content, it is intertwined through all this content. And so looking at the top here, we want to be able to look at serverless concepts. So define what serverless is, compare serverless versus traditional workloads, identify the characteristics of serverless, define serverless deployment models, define serverless general principle designs. So the idea here is that this is really about convincing other people that serverless is a good idea. So that is the whole point of this, just to fundamentally make sure you understand what serverless is. Then we have serverless services. So this is us covering these could be called layers, but these are just categories of serverless services. And then for each, we'll do like an overview of them, and then we'll go into each service and talk more about them and their basic configurations. And so that's that there. And a lot of the practical stuff will be intertwined with this section here. Then we have serverless architecture. So we'll talk about code patterns because there's a lot of different ways to work Lambda. Lambda doesn't have to be a single piece of code per function. It can be used a bunch of different ways. Then we'll look at Lambda in greater detail, the architecture of it. So, like how does it all work? Like what's a code package and, like event sources and things like that. Then we'll look at API Gateway architecture. These two really go together. API Gateway has a lot of stuff going in on it. So I feel like these deserve a little bit more attention at the fundamentals level. Then we have serverless architecture best practices, and then serverless development best practices. So just things that you generally should be doing. Like in serverless development, you should be using test code, right? And using IAC, just knowing that those are best practices. And I feel like this is a little bit light, but I really feel that it's important that we have a domain dedicated to billing and pricing, because a large factor of convincing people to use stuff is it secure, and what is it going to cost me, right? And so we don't really cover much on, there is a security section here, but we definitely want to know costs inside and out. And so here are the domain breakdowns. I just want to point out, like, again, if you were to score 80% on this domain, it's 80% out of 26% when I was just talking about that up here, okay? But yeah, there you go. So hopefully you like what you see. And when I finish the other two, I'll definitely make a video on those and I'll walk through them.